If you're a regular Geek's Guide to the Galaxy listener, please rate and review us on iTunes or using the podcasts app on your phone. And I want to give a special thank you to Bloom Ulysses in Great Britain, who just gave us this 5-star review. Great host, great guests, fascinating topics. There's so much in this podcast, every sci-fi fan will find something. There's discussions of the classic novels, reviews of modern works, and the interviews and panel discussions usually have interesting guests. David's got a good interview style and often asks insightful questions. Just a good podcast overall. So big thanks again to Bloom Ulysses for that great review. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 530 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, which is available now on Amazon.com. We had a great conversation about the book back in episode 500, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And in this episode, we'll be discussing the classic 1992 novel A Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge, the first book in his space opera series, The Zones of Thought. And this will include spoilers for everything in the book, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Tobias S. Buckell, making his 15th appearance on the show. He's the author of the Xenowealth series of space adventure novels, the eco-thrillers Arctic Rising and Hurricane Fever, and the Halo novels The Cole Protocol and Envoy. His latest book, Shoggoths in Traffic and Other Stories, is out now from Fairwood Press. So, Toby, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. 15, wow.
The next up, we've got Abby Goldsmith, making her 6th appearance on the show. She's a co-host of the Stories for Nerds podcast, and her short fiction has appeared in Escape Pod and Fantasy Magazine. Her Torth series of space opera novels are available now on Wattpad, where they've racked up over 65,000 reads. So, Abby, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
And also joining us today is Mercurio D. Rivera, making his 3rd appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Asimov's, Analog, and the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and in books such as The Best Science Fiction of the Year, Volumes 5 and 6. 14 of those stories are included in his collection Across the Event Horizon from Newcon Press, and his story Beyond the Tattered Veil of Stars recently appeared as a podcast from Dust Studios, featuring the voices of Gillian Jacobs from Community and Justin Kirk from Weeds. His first novel, Worgen, The Alien Love War, which was nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke Award, is out now. So, David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Great to be back.
Okay, so let's start off with Toby, and have you tell us about your history reading Vernor Vinge.
This book, I read it, back down in the Caribbean, we have I used to catch books from these little bookshelves that were left stocked with books in harbors and random hotels and things like that. And they would say, take one, leave one on a little sign. And I remember one year at this dive shop, this scuba dive shop in Crown Bay Marina in St. Thomas, I grabbed A Fire Upon the Deep, Bruce Sterling's Islands in the Net, and William Gibson's Neuromancer, and read all 3 of those back to back during the next week. And my mind was sufficiently blown. Just, from reading cyberpunk for the first time to reading this extragalactic computational computer science space adventure with these epic themes and epic set pieces was just a week that, I'll never be able to have a week like that again, to be honest.
Now, had you already read a ton of science fiction at that time, or was this sort of early in your science fiction?
I'd read a lot of science fiction, but it was this kind of stochastic, random encounters with different, classics of the genre. I would just, whatever people left from their boat on these little take one, leave one libraries throughout the Caribbean were the books I would run into. So I had read Golden Age SF, and I'd read, Clarke and Asimov. I'd read some Samuel R. Delaney, but I would read one of the, Hugo Award winning books and then months would go by before I'd run into another one randomly. So to have three, really genre shaping books in a row like that kind of had this tremendous impact on me. And of them, this one was my favorite because I love, big starships and galactic scale sequences. The cyberpunk genre was more kind of like, geographically limited. Whereas like a Fire Upon the Deep, you're just like, you're doing light years, and it's just the ideas and the thoughts and the scale. The thing that I keep coming back to is the scale of the book just kept blowing me away. That opening sequence where I had to read it twice to fully understand the fact that like when she goes to the library, the main character starts off as a librarian, which sounds like a very humble, small job, but she's a archives branch manager, and a branch is like a giant floating space platform orbital ring. The archives are like an orbital ring platform. Like once you realize the scale of things, suddenly like it felt like my brain got realigned, and I was just sort of like, oh, this completely redefines librarian. And yet she's a librarian on a galactic scale. She's a galactic librarian. It's just like, it just kept, every chapter, there was just another nugget of just mind-blowing scale and perspective that would kind of re-click into this new perspective in my brain. And I just adored it.
Yeah. Now, I've wanted to read this for a long time, actually, ever since we were at Clarion together, the Clarion Writers Workshop in 1999. Mm-hmm. And the way I remember it anyway is you told me that this was your favorite book and that you had read it 25 times.
44 times.
Even back then, it was 44 times.
Yeah, I've only read it I think back then it would have been like 41, 42 times. I've read it a couple more times since. But I was low-key obsessed with this book when I was in high school. Low-key obsessed. I not only read it over and over again because I'm dyslexic and ADHD, so I tend to read really fast. You could almost call it skimming. But if I like a book, I'll just keep reading and reading and reading it over and over and over again until it kind of almost rasterizes into its final form in my head. Like back in the day when you had like a 56K modem that you had to dial in and an image would just download slowly, but like all the detail would be missing. And then the next pass, there'd be more detail. And the next pass, there'd be more detail. That's kind of how I read books. And so for this book, I was like, I like this book so much. I just want to download it into my skull. So I'm going to reread it obsessively every like month until I kind of feel like I've like wrapped my head around it. And that's a bit crazy, but like I even paid my sister $20 to kind of like count how many pages were in each chapter. And I built a chart of like what POV was in each chapter and what happened in each chapter. And I drew the scale. I scaled out the entire plot of the book onto like, I think it was like 10 pieces of paper, that I could like unfold and stretch out over an entire floor. So I could kind of see the shape of the book visually. And I used different colored pens for different points of view. The book really had a huge impact on my ability to kind of plot and think about the structure of novels because I really dissected it over and over again because I just wanted to figure out how in the heck he did it. It was really interesting. And I had the opportunity to actually tell him that once, to tell Vernor Vinge that like, yeah, I read your book 44 times. And he took like 2 steps back and was looking for an exit.
Well, that's a bit amazing. Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about what you've figured out about the book after reading it so many times. But let's get other people in here. I hope everyone here has read the book at least 25 times. Otherwise, we're not,
as minimum expectation. Minimum expectation
to be on this panel. No, I've only read it once, so everyone will hopefully have read it at least as many times as I have. But let's get Abby in here. So, Abby, what's your history with Vernor Vinge?
Well, wow, like not 44 times. That's incredible. So honestly, I put off reading it for a long time, even though I knew it was like a must-read golden age sci-fi book. Although honestly, it was published in the 1990s, so I don't know if you could really call that golden age. But yeah, it was recommended a lot, and I kept putting it off, going, I'm not really sure. And then I did finally pick it up recently, like within the last 2 years. And I was blown away. I thought it was just incredible. Much, much better than I was expecting. So, yeah, I ended up reading A Deepness in the Sky just recently. And I enjoyed that even more, honestly. I thought it was just great.
Okay, well, cool. No spoilers, because I haven't read that one. So, but I'll say Deepness in the Sky is a sequel. to, if anyone doesn't know, to this book. So,
well, it's a prequel actually, but same difference.
Okay, it's in the same series as this book. So why do you think? I guess I had a little bit of the same thing. This was way better. I mean, I figured this would be good because Toby liked it so much, but I was just enthralled by this book. I thought it was so good. And I guess like part of the reason it was not, or I thought it wasn't going to be as good as it is because on the cover there's this I don't know, like giant space manta ray or something. And so it's like, oh, this looks kind of like cheesy, or like I don't know, or sort of like more like I thought it was going to be just more sort of actiony.
I was expecting. I guess like a lot of Golden Age sci-fi tends to be very retro. Like the ideas were good for the time, but they don't really like you have to kind of read them with an academic mindset because they don't really fit with what we know about Mars and the moon and so forth these days. But obviously this was written much more recently and it doesn't, there's a little bit of retro going on, but really not much.
Yeah. I wouldn't call this I would call this more like news. I think there was, the new space opera kind of like Ian M. Banks sort of, helped revitalize the space opera genre in kind of what, like the late 80s, I guess, or something. And then they were kind of like, actually, this book has an introduction by John Good where he talks about that a little bit, where you had authors like Alistair Reynolds and Peter F. Hamilton, Linton Nagata, I think he mentions, all kind of like helping to bring space opera back to prominence. Yeah. But there is no giant space manta thing in the book, right? And did I just miss that, or like where did
there were no space mantas? No.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
No, I thought that was a ship. I don't think it's a space manta. I think
it's
really shaped.
But it's like a manta-shaped spaceship thing or something. Yeah.
Right, and if you read the book, like the Out of Bound, which is the starship that they spend most of the time in, is not described as like that. It's much more utilitarian.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me get David in here too, though. So, David, what's your history with Vernor Vinge?
Sure. Well, obviously, I'm not worthy. I have not read it that many times. This is my second read. I read it back around the time it came out, maybe a year or two after. At the time, I was reading. I came to realize things that won the Hugo Award are good books to read. I started to just read Hugo Award-winning books, and this one was one of the recent winners. So I sat down and read it, and I was blown away at the time. I was afraid to revisit it because I loved it so much, and I was afraid it wouldn't hold up. I shouldn't have been. It really does, for the most part, hold up. And what I loved about it, it was my introduction to real, I guess I would call it classic space opera. This grand scale storytelling, such ambitious and impressive plotting. The personal drama and the emotions and the deceptions, all against this vast cosmic backdrop. This amazing setting. I'm sure we'll get into the zones of thought.
Yeah.
What a great concept. And on reread it, while it all held up, what stood out in my mind when I read the book back 25 years ago, and rereading it now is the Tynes, the aliens on this world, the pack mind that he creates for these aliens. I mean, it blew me away at the time, and it stayed with me all these years. That's what I was looking forward to when I read it now. And again, it was just amazing the way he pulls it off. And from a craft perspective, as somebody who writes aliens, I went back and I kept rereading the way he introduced them and the way he introduces the concepts, just a little bit at a time. Like a character will say, he held up his heads, and you're like, heads, okay, and it all comes together a little bit. It comes together eventually, but a little bit you're confused. And I love how eventually it all comes together, and you understand what you're finally seeing. But yeah, it was so impressive at the time, and it remains impressive.
Yeah, the edition I have, it's Tor has this new line called Tor Essentials, and they just released this, I don't know, I think within the past couple of years. But the edition I have, it has a quote on the back from Jo Walton where she says something like, this book has, most authors would use the ideas in this book for over a 10-book series or something. It has like 10 books worth of ideas packed into it. And I was just like, like every couple of pages there was just some like amazing idea where I was like, oh yeah, and I was like underlining everything. And
Yeah, I wonder, David, how we were going to discuss it, because there's just so much going on. So much going on. I was like, I started listing the characters, and I'm like, well, it's a lot of characters, and the ideas. There's a lot of ideas. The plot is complicated. So it's just an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, we're probably only going to be able to scratch the surface of all the ideas that are discussed in the book, and definitely, like, if you haven't read it, again, seriously, spoiler warning, because this is going to have spoilers in it. So yeah, let's talk about so there's like basically this book. I mean, there's two big amazing ideas in this book, right? There's the zones of thought, and there's the Tynes group mind aliens.
Yeah.
And the Tynes. Let's do the zones of thought first, but I'll just say parenthetically, the Tynes, I think, are the best aliens I've ever read in science fiction. Certainly, I would say they're in the running.
Well, I mean, it's like there are a number of amazing aliens, because the Scrode Riders, like, to this day, like the Scrode Riders are also just a fantastic creation as well.
They're very memorable.
Okay, wait, but I'm going to do the zones of thought first.
Okay.
Let's get the aliens. We'll get to the aliens a little bit later. But Toby, since you've read this book 44 times, maybe you can explain the zones of thought.
All right, so the Milky Way, right? If you just wonder, like, why haven't we been contacted by, aliens, and why is like faster than light travel like so hard? So Vernor comes up with this idea that the Milky Way, the entire galaxy, is divided into these like what are called zones of thought, right? There are 4 of them. There are 4 zones, right? And there's the unthinking depths, and that's like the galactic center, right? And so the idea is, like, each of these zones, you can think at different speeds, different capacities, right? And we live in what's something called the slow zone. Old Earth is in the slow zone. That's where we're all kind of like, compared to the galaxy, kind of stupid, right? And biological intelligence is possible in the slowness, but you can't build like artificial sentient intelligence and machinery and automation and like artificial gravity and faster than light communication. So like the reason why we can't access those things is because we're kind of like in the slow zone. And then below the slow zone in the galactic center are the unthinking depths. And like if you try to take a starship and you're going, at sub-light speeds, and you end up in the unthinking depths, like you end up incapable of even human intelligence. You can't even operate your machinery in any meaningful kind of capacity. And then above the slow zone, above us, above where old Earth is something called the beyond, which is where like artificial intelligence and FTL and artificial gravity and all these really cool big space opera things exist. And beyond the beyond is something called the transcend, which is where you have like these like almost like godlike intelligent beings, right? That are artificial intelligence, like a technological singularity exist, right? And so most of this novel kind of initially takes place in the beyond, this sort of space opera, this grand space opera area where they have access to these like really amazing technologies, which is where a handful of human civilizations exist. They've kind of left the slow zone of where old Earth is and have made their way into the beyond, and they're part of this greater galactic civilization. But kind of above them are these like godlike intelligences and technologies that occasionally dip down in and kind of meddle in regular affairs. And that's kind of just the initial setting of the first paragraph. And the book is set up, right, with like this idea that there's some archaeologists that are people in the beyond, different alien groups, right, go and find elements of technology that have dropped from the transcend into the beyond, and they try to, like it's that classic SF trope of like, the archaeological artifact that you find that's got all this like godlike powers in it, right? So any civilization that goes and meddles with a transcend device, sometimes you can unlock a really cool piece of technology, or sometimes you can end your entire civilization. And so the beginning of this is a bunch of humans are kind of screwing around with this artifact that they find, and they unleash a virus that comes from the transcend, right? And a virus that comes from the transcend is basically like unleashing a god, right? It's like a civilizational ending event. And that's like what happens in the first handful of paragraphs is a bunch of archaeologists unlock a menace from the transcendence. And like that's the inciting incident of the whole novel.
Yeah, I'll just add to that is that it's sort of set up that all these civilizations, because you have to get farther and farther from the galactic core to become more and more powerful, there's sort of this natural process by which civilizations are making their way farther and farther out into space. And so there's this sort of this constant churn of, as civilizations achieve more and more power and ability to travel and so on, they take off for parts unknown. And so there's this constant churn of new civilizations emerging and departing and emerging and departing.
Some coming up from the slow zone into the beyond, some from the beyond into the transcend, and occasionally some of them fall back. Yeah.
Yeah. But so Abby, when you started this book and you hit this zones of thought idea, kind of what was your initial reaction to that?
I mean, I thought it was pretty cool. Like it had so many interesting possibilities. Although, yeah, I would say the first time I read it, it was a little confusing. It took a long time for me to understand exactly what it meant, and I'm still a little bit confused about it. But
yeah, I guess I have very few criticisms of this book, but I'll say I guess that's one, is I felt like the first couple chapters were maybe, like, I could definitely, I mean, I sort of knew a lot of this stuff already, so it wasn't as confusing to me maybe, but I was definitely thinking as I was reading it, like, wow, this could definitely be confusing to the first time reader.
Yeah.
They have an illustration in the inside jacket of the book that kind of draws the zones, and then and they have one of the characters who is he's a resurrected being, kind of a character almost out of a fantasy novel, who's given new life, and as a result of that, since he's new to the whole backdrop, another character explains the zones of thought to him, which I thought was a clever way to let the readers in on the way it all is set up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, the edition I have, it has an introduction by John Clute, and he sort of explains the whole thing. And when I was reading it, I was kind of like, dude, spoilers, this is giving too much away. But then once I hit the first couple chapters, I was like, okay, I can kind of see why he did that. It does kind of help having a little explanation going in.
Such a clever way to deal with faster than light travel too. Very, so original and creative.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I thought was so cool is the fact that, like, if you are a civilization that operates somewhere between the slow zone and the beyond, you have, like, the starships have, like, these old school ramjets that sort of like slower than light travel engines in them. So they have like two engine systems. There's the faster than light engine system and the slower than light one, and like cold sleep equipment. So you get like these old, the old like slower than light, cold sleep travel of science fiction mixed in with the faster than light woo 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 space opera at the same time. And I was just sort of like, oh man, talk about just grabbing all the different tools to use in the same book, because usually you have like one or the other, but like, well, if we're going to hit the like slow zone, we're going to need these ramjets and cold sleep pods. So like the whole thing drops in there. And then there's all this math about like if you accidentally end up in a slow zone and how long it takes you to get back out. It's just like, whoa,
Yeah. No, it's all super cool. So Abby, so going back to the first couple chapters, so there's the zones of thought, and then let's also talk about a couple of the characters. We're not gonna, as David said, we're not gonna try to do all of them, but so you're introduced to these sort of human characters. Wait, I have the Ravna Berensdot and fairly quickly Tham Nguyen. So kind of what was your initial reaction to those characters?
I mean, kind of a little neutral at first. They're right in saying, Tham Nguyen is kind of like a swashbuckling hero from Golden Age sci-fi almost, where he grew up in some medieval world that was set back the civilization collapse. So he grew up as like the minor son of a king. And then he was like introduced to a trading cold sleep, slow space travel civilization where he became one of the traders. And then he was like renewed into this like the beyond. So yeah, it's a lot of change for a character to undergo, and Ravna is immediately drawn to him. So was a kind of cute, but a little bit tropey setup, I thought, with these two characters.
Yeah, and Ravna, I'll explain, is the librarian character that Toby mentioned earlier. Yeah, and so this Pham Nguyen character, he was a member of this trading organization called the Chang Ho.
The Chang Ho.
Chang Ho.
Yeah, I actually read about the same character in The Deepness in the Sky, the prequel book. Pham Nguyen is a major character in that book as well, and it goes really deep into his backstory there.
Okay, I'll just say in the introduction, or in the dedication, Vinge writes, "Thanks to Paul Anderson for the quote that I use as the motto of the Chang Ho." And if you read through the book, that motto is, "Politics may come and go, but greed goes on forever."
That's great.
So David, do you have anything else, or anything you want to add about the characters?
Definitely. For Pham Nguyen, my favorite aspect of that character was that he seems like such a stock fantasy character. He's lived a life as this galactic adventurer, almost like a space pirate prince. It was like all these fantasy tropes that are part of his background. But what I love about it, at least in this novel, I don't remember Deepness in the Sky, which I read way back when, is the idea that his history is such a trope that you come to suspect that it's all been implanted, that it's not real, that these were all fake memories that were given to him when he was resurrected. And I love that he's tormented by that, and that Ravna also she almost comes to pity him whenever he talks about his grand adventures. So Vinge kind of subverts the whole idea by introducing that concept that lasts for the entirety of pretty much the entirety of the novel. So I love that. Ravna, I thought was, she's sort of I thought she was the central point of view character for the novel. She's sort of the voice of reason. She starts off as the librarian at the Relay Hub, who kind of read fantasy novels about characters like Pham growing up. So it's funny that she encounters him. But I thought she was sort of like the voice of reason. As a result of that, I thought she could be a little bit bland, but she was, in my view, kind of almost representing the point of view of the reader. So.
Yeah, and then I'll also just add, we have sort of two other main human characters, Jeffrey and Joanna Allenstadt, and their parents are among the archaeologists who unleashed this, godlike virus that Toby mentioned. And so then they end up fleeing, possibly with a countermeasure for this virus, and they end up stranded on an alien planet. And like I said, I have very few criticisms of this book, but since other people have mentioned it, I guess one thing that did occur to me is I do feel like the human characters are maybe a little on the bland side. I mean, I think that there's so much amazing stuff going on that it doesn't matter, and it maybe even would be distracting if the human characters were too colorful. It might just be too much. But since you've read this 44 times, what do you think about the human characters? Do you think that they're a little on the bland side, or they have?
I think they feel bland. Sorry, I'm talking over you, but I think they feel bland because there's so much really cool stuff going on, right? I mean, you could write a whole science fiction story about, Ravna, going to the Relay and, having those experiences she does. And, like you said, every 2 pages, something huge is coming out of this book. So I don't know how you could have made Ravna any more, colorful than she is, right? She just has so many interesting people to go up against that it's hard for her to not be a victim of the circumstances of how interesting the novel is, making her seem a little bit more bland. But I don't think she's bland. I think she's the character that we kind of use as a way into the novel, and that allows us to kind of see the wildness of what's going on around them. I think she's like a grounded, point of view for us to experience these crazy stories that are whirling around her. And it's very reflective of the nature of the human civilizations that are in this book, which is that they are small and out of their depth in many ways.
Yeah. Okay, well, so let's get into the aliens, which are definitely not bland in any way. So Abby, why don't you tell us about the Tines?
Oh, they're adorable, first of all, because they're basically wolf packs. But they're connected, their minds are connected. So there's kind of 4 to 8 wolf individuals, which are called members. But they can, like, 3 of them cannot form a complete individual. It has to be 4 or more.
I think, isn't it 3? You need 3 to be human level intelligence.
No, I think 3, they're kind of just below human level.
Toby, 44 times, tell us. Is it 3 or 4?
It's you need at least 4.
At least 4. Okay.
At least 4.
I stand corrected. Okay.
So
sorry,
it's you need at least 4, and if you go over 8, you become part of such a large group mind that, like, distinctiveness is erased. And do you remember the tropical tines are all one large sort of circle cluster. So like at 3, you can survive and get around, but you're kind of like almost a subhuman mind, but more intelligent than an animal. But it's not considered effective. It's kind of like being wounded or disabled in their conception of, like, thought.
Okay, I stand corrected. Okay, so Abby, continue.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean that's what it is. It's so interesting. So a lot of it's proximity based, and the novel definitely goes into that later when they start getting technologically more advanced thanks to the humans. But they start out like and they're a medieval level kind of pre-spacefaring civilization. They are not at the level of spaceflight or anything. They have not invented electricity. But the novel kind of makes a point about the fact that they cannot go into close proximity to each other, or they do start to lose their sense of self. Because if they send like 3 or 4, whatever many members next to another one, they start overlapping thoughts. And the whole point is to, like, the pack has to stay together in order to stay a cohesive person. And they do think of themselves as individual people, as a pack.
Yeah.
So each member, like each member is not an individual. It is it doesn't think for itself. It's a person in this world is somebody with basically like 4 or more bodies.
Yeah. I'll also just add to that, they communicate sort of by sounds. So they have these highly developed, they're called tympana, sort of eardrum structures that, and they so they're kind of sort of constantly sending out their thoughts, like broadcasting basically their thoughts. And so any of these aliens close by are picking up their thoughts and sharing their thoughts. Mm-hmm. And so David, have some more thoughts about the Tines?
I sure do. I mean, we could probably talk the whole podcast about the Tines, but I thought the thing that fascinated me most of all about them was, well, apart from what was just discussed, the fact that it's one mind with 4 to 8 bodies, but the aspect of almost of eugenics, the fact that they breed, just like we breed dogs, I guess they breed themselves to create certain personality types. I found that absolutely fascinating. If for example, if it's a pack of eight of these beings, and 2 or 3 of them die, and you replace them with 2 or 3 others, you can kind of affect the personality by adding a certain personality type to the 2 additions. And in that way, you can sort of skew the person's personality in that way. And characters in the book, the good characters and the villainous characters, they breed packs to see if they can create, more intelligent ones, more creative ones. And that's it plays an important part of the plot, certainly. But I found that fascinating. By the way, I also like the Toby mentioned this, that when you have several packs get together, they kind of lose their individuality and they become more, if you see multiple packs together, it's usually for orgies or for battles, and they kind of lose their individual thoughts. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. Like I said, I was just really amazed at how well developed the Tines are. Like how many of the implications of this idea are explored in this one book. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that I would sort of expect an author to come up with over many, many years and many, many books of developing the idea. But it was like he had thought all this stuff out so thoroughly. Just when he wrote this book. I guess I did notice that he wrote a short story called The Blabber a couple years before this book was published, which is set in the same universe. And it doesn't have the tines. I haven't read. Has anyone read The Blabber by any chance?
I actually have not.
Okay, just from what I read, I don't think that the tines are in it, but there's a different group mind, kind of alien, and it also has the zones of thought and everything. So he had, and that was published in '88. So at least 4 or 5 years maybe he was thinking about some of these ideas before he wrote Fire Upon the Deep. But I mean, it seems like he's been thinking about it for decades. I mean, it's so highly developed. And even like the thing where there in the book, there's a part where there's like a battle, and a lot of the Tines are badly injured, and so you have just these injured members, these this lone wolf kind of aliens who are injured, and they're basically just all gonna die. And one of the human characters says like, "Oh, do they have to die? Couldn't they join new packs?" And one of the Tines says, "Well, no. If you're a pack, would you want one of them joining you? They're better off dying." And just stuff like that was just so plausible and so carefully thought out.
Yeah, I like the fact that the main one of the main villains in the book is a dictator who was assassinated, or at least almost assassinated. Multiple parts of him were assassinated, and a couple of his individual parts kind of wandered off on their own and wound up joining another pack. And then those, and they have such a powerful personality, they were able to highly influence the new pack that they've joined. And in fact, his name is Flenser, and they called the new pack Flenser in Waiting, because eventually, that villain is going to reemerge. That personality is going to reemerge. And by the way, I love that. I love that inner turmoil of that character. I think it's called the name of the character is Triathect.
Tirithect, yeah.
Tirithect, and she's trying to keep him in check, keep the villain in check for a good part of the novel. So I love that turmoil.
Yeah, I also found it was interesting that it wasn't just that he was assassinated and wandered off. It's just that they had a backup plan for what to do in case of an assassination attempt, and it was distributing parts of Flenser to some other packs. And then all those packs were making these pilgrimages to go back to his place of power to reconstitute the pack as much as they could. And it was just sort of and so that new person made out of one of those packs becomes one of the heroes we almost follow, because they end up kind of affecting the final makeup of the villain, right? Like it's like you said, the implications of this were so thought out.
So Toby, did you notice stuff about the Tines on reading 20 or reading 40 that you didn't notice the first time through, or did they become more? Were there I don't know, wrinkles that you're oh, I now understand that? Or
there's a lot of from having it read multiple times, there's just thoughts and reactions that Tire Effect has that you don't land, but after having read it multiple times, you're of course that's why they would have this reaction here, because one of the members of the pack has this reaction, and you're why would that one have this reaction? There's just this turmoil and tenseness to that constituted group that is really shown in what you think as personality in the first part of the novel. And then when you get the reveal, you're just kind of oh, cool. But when you reread it, you can reread that stuff knowing then that this is you understand who all the different members are. And that's so super cool.
Yeah, I definitely want to reread this, because I just sort of glanced at the first couple pages again, or the first chapter, and I was oh, wow, this is making a lot more sense now. But let's talk. So the other main alien race that we see in the book are called the Scrode Riders. So Abby, you want to tell us about the Scrode Riders?
I mean, what's not to like about a kind of potted fern riding on kind of a little ATV. Yeah. I mean, I just thought they were pretty cool. They don't really think the way humans do. They can't hold linear thoughts as well, and they were kind of uplifted by these scrodes, these things that they ride that help them with mobility and also with their memory issues.
Yeah. So we find out that they're these aliens, and they're basically, they would just sit in the ocean and let the waves wash over them. and in their natural state, they didn't do much more than that. And yeah, at some point in the very distant past, some more advanced alien race came along and put them on these little like go-kart kind of things that helps store their memories and help them get around. And super cool aliens. David, you want to say anything else about the Scrode Riders?
I kind of imagine them as like potted plants on skateboards. And I like the fact that sometimes they disconnect from their Scrodes and they can kind of take a break and exist in the moment. I think the way they naturally do, because normally they would have trouble retaining short-term memories, and I like that aspect of the way that they think. I thought they were cute and interesting, and I like that he gives the two Scrode Riders kind of distinct personalities. It's like a couple that are traveling on the ship with our other main characters, and since I guess we're revealing spoilers. One of the big reveals is that because they are an uplifted race, and that they've been uplifted by the villainous virus that's the main villain in the whole novel that's tracking down our main characters, and as a result of that, they are not trustworthy because they're kind of like potential sleeper agents for this vast alien virus. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I thought it was like, especially like going back and looking at some of my notes through the book and everything, everything in the book is so carefully set up. And so one of the things is that like early on, there's the suggestion that I forget why you think this, but it suggested that I think there's something about, you watch out for traitors or something like that. And I actually wrote a note saying like, is Fam going to turn out to be a traitor? So like that idea is set up. And then they're these sort of they're presented as the bad guys but they get the idea that maybe there's an alien race that's a tool of the blight of this evil virus, and that it must be the humans. And so these aliens are going around committing genocide on humans essentially to fight the blight. And we think that this is totally crazy, but then it turns out that they were kind of right. They just had the wrong alien race in mind. But like, nothing ever comes out of nowhere. Like everything is really well set up so that when it happens later on, you're just like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, there's this paranoia that blows up when the blight, which is the virus, when the blight is released and it begins to like take over all of these areas. Like it's just taking over. And like some races are freaking out, and they're like, who's it suborned, who's it taken over? And they're like, humans are the latest people who've popped up out of this, out of the slow zone and into the beyond. And so everyone's suspicious, and they're like getting ready to wipe out humanity because they're like these, the blight has, control over an entire race of some kind. And then it turns out to be the Scrode Riders, the very sweet Scrode Riders, who, by the way, I love that the Scrode Riders are like, they're not just a couple that happens to be on the ship. They're kind of like they own the ship, right? And they're the ones who are piling it around and trading and running around and meandering all over the universe. So it makes total sense why these Scrode Riders would have picked up that as a way of making a living, right? Like they're compelled because of their Scrodes to try and be everywhere, right? And they end up being the moles, so to speak.
Yeah. Let me just explain the plot, because I feel like we haven't quite set everything up. But so there's two stories going on. There's the story of Jeffrey and Joanna, who were marooned on the Tynes planet and have been captured by opposing factions of these Tyne pack aliens in this medieval kind of society. So that's one story. And then in the other story, there's Ravna and Fam and the Scrode Riders, Blue Shell and Greenstalk, and kind of their civilization is under attack, and they have reason to believe that there's a weapon they can use to fight the blight on this Tynes planet. So they're trying to get there, and they're being pursued by agents of the blight. So that's kind of, and we alternate back and forth between those two storylines. So all that's going on, and then Toby, you mentioned that there's all this paranoia and like, people saying crazy stuff and everything. And so obviously you can't have a better model for that sort of atmosphere than Usenet. And so Vernor Vinge, this novel was written or published in 92. And so Usenet was kind of the main, instantiation of internet culture at the time, where there were just all these message boards and people would post messages and have these giant flame wars and stuff like that. And so Vinge has very obviously modeled, and so because of limitations of sending information across vast reaches of space, they have to send it in kind of these short text messages. They can't send they can't Zoom, around but they can't do video conferencing around the galaxy. So Toby, do you want to comment on the Usenet character of so much of these conversations between aliens?
So after I read it so obsessively in high school and a chunk of college, I'm old enough that was right around when, the internet started to take off. And I started to realize what he was talking about, which was Usenet. And so after many years went by of not reading it, I was nervous about going back to reread it because I was like, well, basically, I don't know how well that Usenet metaphor will hold up. And of course, it's always scary to go back to a book you loved 20 years ago and be like, okay, what holds up and what doesn't. I found it really compelling, because I remember when I was in high school poring over the headers of all of those emails to try and figure out where they came from, because the book has the relays that it takes to get from place to place. Because they suggest so much more, that's out there than just what we got to see. But they call it the web of lies, right? All these messages, the web of a million lies. And if that is just not even though it was written in 92, if that is just not a summary of the internet as we have come to know and hate it today, I don't know what is.
It's an example of it's prescient sci-fi at its best. I mean, this is. I read it in 93, 94. The internet wasn't a thing. I mean, I wasn't even familiar with Usenet. All of this was very strange to me, that people are sending these intergalactic or intragalactic memos to each other. And it turned out to be galactic Twitter, and you can't trust the word anybody says because they're all spinning the truth for their own purposes.
Exactly. It is so galactic Twitter, and and genocide happening because of a bad tweet. What would you read about Facebook? And how it aided genocide. Rohingya, and all of these other things. And I'm like, how in the crap? I read all these cyberpunk books that I thought were preparing me, for the internet, but it turns out that the book that most prepared me for the internet as it stands today is A Fire Upon the Deep, and it's Web of a Million Lies, and it's whole, groups of people trying to commit genocide because of something they read on the Web of a Million Lies. And I'm just like, oh my God, this book really, 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 really prepared me for all this.
Abby, were you going to say something?
Oh, I liked how it kind of dovetails with the Tynes sort of telepathic communication, where they're very limited, and because of the limitations they have, where it's proximity based and all that, it can't really become the web of lies there. But there's a hint that it could become that if they can start spreading, they're across distances and having the big pack mentality type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, another development that happens in the book is that it's what happens when these pack aliens who have to always stick together in their packs get access to radio. And then, it's just, once again, it's just so many different developments of, taking these ideas so far. Well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? I'll mention too, Vernor Vinge, I believe was a professor of mathematics and computer science at San Diego State, I think. So, he was definitely on the cutting edge of computer technology at the time. It's no accident that he, was sort of had such a sophisticated understanding of emerging computer culture.
The other thing that blew my mind about this book, and I still think about this all the time, is he had this idea in it of code on top of code on top of code, archaeological depths of computer code, which in the 90s, didn't feel like that was a thing yet, right? But now when I think about like, GUI strapped on top of a command line, like just how, what was I reading the other day that a whole area of the internet and computer program that people use went down because it depended on a piece of open source software that was maintained by one person since like 1970 something, and he stopped. And like there was so much archaeological cruft laid over all this other code that no one knew that there was this one key piece that some open source dude was just maintaining all along. And when that stopped, like the whole thing fell apart for a moment, and it's like, holy crap. Like, I mean, he was talking about that in this book where they're like, the way in which like pieces of code are hidden. And like there's this whole moment where like when the humans realize that the blight is among them and they're on this asteroid and they take off, right? And there's like these ships fleeing the blight, and it's like it's trying to figure out how to get into their ships to suborn them, to take them over. And like the way it does it is with a communications laser that happens to finally find a sensor, like a heat sensor on the side of one of the ships. And it's like, good, I'm in, and it's just like, what?
That was awesome, and I love that that's done from the point of view of that malicious AI. It's the only place in this gigantic novel where we're in it's the third person close POV of that malicious AI virus and how it looks at the humans as pernicious microbes is the word. So I thought it was really cool.
Let me mention the annotated version. So I just finished the book this morning, so I didn't have a ton of time to do research. But just as I was poking around this morning, I came across on Wikipedia, it mentions that there was so this book won the Hugo Award in '93. And so there was some since CD-ROMs were like hot new technology at the time, they put out a CD-ROM with all of the nominees and everything on it. And so as a sort of special bonus, Vernor Vinge, I guess he, I don't know if all his books, at least this one, he would comment it, like he would comment, because he's a computer scientist and everything. He would comment your code. As he was writing it, he would put in little notes to himself, like check this fact, or like, maybe this plot could go in this direction or something. And so apparently I wasn't able to actually get the version with the annotations, but apparently I'm sure there is a way to get it, and you can read all his little notes and there's like hundreds of them throughout the book, I think. I guess, did anyone else, did you read any of that stuff I sent about the annotated edition?
I did. I've been trying to get my hands on the annotated edition for a while. I'd love to get it. I would really get a kick out of that. So I might. I have a distant memory of someone giving me the CD-ROM, and I don't know where I would have that. I know I didn't get around to looking at it, and I don't even know where I would have it. So I'm kind of in a state of. I just listened to the book again earlier this year, I think it was, or I don't know what even is time in these pandemic times. But at some point during the pandemic, I was having a really rough week, and I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just re-listen. I have an Audible account, so I wonder what the audio version of A Fire Upon the Deep is like. I'm just going to listen to it again while I kind of get a bunch of work done around the house. And like I said, I was really nervous and about going back to it after an extended period of time away from it, but I just fell right back into it. That moment where the two Scroderiders, Blue Shell and Greenstock, are like on the Tynes world, and they're trying to redeem themselves after the great betrayal. And oh my gosh, like that scene, like to this day, that scene where they're in the burning castle kills me every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just say about the annotated, one more thing about the annotated. If you read the I was able to read sort of his endnote thing where he talks a little bit about how he came up with some of the ideas for the book and so on. But he says that, when he was putting this together, he had what he thought would be kind of a cool idea where he said every book should be encoded as a text file, which included all the information about how the book was written, so that you could read the book, but then you could also sort of like watch it being it would record every keystroke, right? So you could watch like the author wrote this sentence and then like erased this word and then wrote this word and then, moved this paragraph around, and that all that information would be encoded in the text of the digital text of the book. And he says, that's well within the storage capacity. And even, in 1993, that was within the storage capacity. And, now we have like so much.
Now we have GitHub.
And we know what to do with. So I just thought that was a really interesting idea, because I did see Brandon Sanderson once, like did a YouTube video of him like writing the first chapter of, I think it was the Stormlight series. And you could watch him, make typos and erase them and stuff like that.
I'm a fan, but that's a bit much. I don't think I want to see them make typos and move the paragraphs around. Maybe Toby could tell me about it.
Well, so I've long had this kind of like frustration with the tools available to us as fiction writers versus the tools available to coders, right? Like GitHub is like pretty darn amazing. We have when you're coding, they have all these tools that like autocomplete things or allow scratch pads. There's a lot of version tracking, versioning, branching, forking, stuff that you can do in code. And it solves problems that coders have that are actually the same problems we have as fiction writers. And so I am actually kind of somewhat dissatisfied with the current state of word processing.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I think it would be cool if every book, if you wanted to, you could see what the entire composition process had been. I mean, just for scholars and super fans and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Ulysses has this like every 5-minute snapshotting capability. It's an app I use. And you can just sort of flick through the history of each individual document as it changes. And I find that endlessly fascinating.
I mean, I've seen like some indie authors doing this like live writing on Twitch for their fans.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Which I don't know. I've as a fan, I don't think I would want to see that.
Sort of like a stadium full of people watching someone with a giant broadcast screen behind them as they like type. We can cheer them on, like competitive writing.
Right.
Oh, he deleted that word. Oh my gosh.
Right.
I once did when I was talking about like how we create stories, because like everyone, I don't know about you all, but like whenever I talk about writing, you almost inevitably get at least one person in a decent sized audience who goes, "Where do you get your ideas from?" And I taught I did a lecture on creativity where I started with just a blank board. It was like a whole sort of like perform art thing type scenario. And what I did was I had the audience throw out prompts, and I worked them through how you just start with a blank board and you come up with prompts and ideas, and you brainstorm and you discard dumb ones and you elevate the interesting ones. You try to make some connections. You try to supercharge the concept, come up with kind of like a story seed, and then a rough outline. And then I wrote live with like a projector on a big screen behind me, a short story in front of an audience as they like bought dinner, got some finger food, wandered around and looked at some paintings in a location. And then over the next hour wrote a very short kind of complete short story as a piece of performance art, and then like read it out loud when I was done, and so that they could see like the entire process from beginning to end. And that was really interesting. But like the problem is for writing, it's long, right? It's like, it's an hour of coming up with the idea and talking to them about how creativity works. And then it was another hour of writing the story in front of them. And then like half an hour of revision. And then like I performed the story. So it's like this 3-hour commitment. And that's just a lot to ask of people.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Maybe we can do a panel on writing live, because there's probably more to say about that. I mean, like Harlan Ellison, I guess, used to like take a prompt from the audience and sit in the window of the bookstore and write the story and then read it. I mean, but we have enough to say about Fire Upon the Deep, so I want to focus on that. But does anyone else have anything else before I suggest any other topics? Does anyone else, like Abby or David, have anything you just really want to talk about in regards to Fire Upon the Deep?
I mean, I'll just say, like, with both this and Deepness in the Sky, the only 2 books I've read by him so far, those are some amazingly epic plotting that he has going on. Like other people have said, you could fit a series. I just love how fast moving it is and how big the scope is. He has a huge universe, a huge galaxy imagined there. So,
Actually, another in those endnotes, another thing he says is that he wrote the time. I think he wrote the whole Tynes story pretty much, and he's like that went really smoothly, and so I had that done. And then the Ravna story was originally completely different. He says like originally she was a secret agent, like spying on Strownley Realm, or I forget the details, but he says he wrote like half of that storyline. And was just like, this sucks, and threw the whole thing out and started over from scratch.
Wow.
Yeah, that would have worked too. I mean, I can see that. Yeah.
Wow. In the introduction to the edition that I read, he mentions that he wrote the novel while he was in a good part of it when he was in Norway. And so I find that interesting that the characters that make it up into the beyond, they're all Norwegians, or they have Norwegian names. So I don't know how prescient that was. The Norwegians will conquer the universe, but that was
well, I mean, he also says in the introduction he mentions that he was visiting like the Aniara Foundation or something like that. So yeah, I definitely think that was a big, that sort of idea comes back in the book. But yeah, I think that was a big influence in different ways.
If I remember right, yeah, he posits that they were like Norwegian asteroid miners that made it out of the slow zone into the beyond from old Earth.
I'll also just say a couple other things. Or David, do you have anything, other just general topics you want to discuss with Fire Upon the Deep?
I'm trying to think now. Not specifically. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, okay. I'll just mention a couple other things I turned up in my research. I think this was just on Wikipedia, but it says that the original title was Among the Tynes, and it says its final title was suggested by his editors. So definitely definitely props to his editors there on that one.
Yeah.
What do you all think the title means? I mean, there was a scene later in the book where there's a space battle and the ship kind of goes off I
have a thought.
What's that?
A Fire Upon the Deep is because they're in the deep, right? They're no longer in they're no longer in the beyond, right? So well, here's another huge plot twist, right? Which is that like the zones of thought normally don't ever move, right? It's kind of like mapped. It'd be like, the continent of America moving, right? Like there may be some like change through some kind of natural process, little bit by little bit, but there's no like major movement. And the thing that happens, the countermeasure, is the ability of a piece of code to basically reshape the zones of thought. So when all of these things are coming down to try and attack the countermeasure, the Blight is sending all of these like ships, just thousands of ships to attack, right? Like the countermeasure is the ability to kind of like drop the ability to think, right? And so it basically just creates a pocket of stupidity around the Blight, while also descending thousands of civilizations into like unthinkingness. Right. It's just like so mind blowing that the zones can move. Like the moment we get to the point where the zones start moving, it's just like madness. It's like so huge. And so I think a Fire Upon the Deep is like the fire, the countermeasure is like in the deep, right? There's something burning in the deep. That's my thought.
Awesome.
I mean, my interpretation was that the fire is the Blight, that the deep is, because there's this metaphor early on in the book where it says that the slow zone is like the depths of the ocean where, things from the surf, things from higher up in the ocean could get down there if they really, really wanted to, but in general, they don't bother. So it seems pretty clear to me that the deep is the slow zone or at least the lower beyond.
There's this beautiful metaphor at the end of the novel when one of the Scroad riders is kind of laid out to kind of pasture in this alien ocean, and they pick an area of the ocean that's the most ferocious with the strongest waves, and kind of where the ocean surges the most. And there's an observation by the other characters that's where life tends to thrive in the conflict in that zone between the ocean and the shore where the waves are the most ferocious. And I thought, wow, that's really beautifully written and a nice metaphor for what we've just read about these zones.
Yeah, but so I just think the fire is the Blight, is that there's the deep, and there's this because it just conveys the sense like there's this big emergency, like shit is all happening. I think that's my interpretation of the title. But I think a lot of times, for a title or something, it's just more important that it sounds cool than that it necessarily means anything. I think this title, I think that interpretation, or Toby's interpretation, like totally work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just more important. I think that the main thought was just like, doesn't that sound cool? You know?
Yeah.
It's like, sometimes you have a title that sounds cool and you put it on a book. Sometimes you have a robot manta ray that has nothing to do with the story and it doesn't work as much. I mean, like it's just,
But in defense of the manta ray, I mean, that's why I picked it. Like I saw like a ship that looked like a manta ray that was all, metallic. And I just thought like, well, there'll probably be something kind of cool in here. Like, let's give it a whirl and see what happens.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I heard, David Hartwell was telling me one time about, I don't know if he picked it but the cover for Ender's Game, I think it was specifically the cover for Speaker for the Dead is kind of this like techno city with like flying cars and stuff. And the book is set on a like a planet with like farms and stuff. The cover has nothing to do with the book at all, but it like that cover accurately conveys what genre and mood the book is. Whereas if you just had a picture of a farm, it wouldn't, right? So so it's maybe the same thing where, yeah, there's no giant manta ray robot ship in the book, but it tells you that this is like crazy space opera shit.
Yeah, but if you like giant manta ray starships, this might be your book.
Abby, anything else you wanted to say there?
No, I would just agree. I guess I know I keep saying Deepness in the Sky, but that one, I feel like he melded the theme to the title of the book a little bit more. This one, you're right, it's a little bit more guesswork.
Mm-hmm. So you said you think Deepness in the Sky is even better than this?
Yeah, I liked it better, yeah.
Well, I mean, come on. What, look at the opening line for Deepness in the Sky. The manhunt extended across more than 100 light years and 8 centuries. Like, that's just, woo!
Wait, so Toby, how many times have you read Deepness in the Sky?
Just a few times. I that came out when I was did not have as much spare free time.
Do you agree that it's better, or like how would you compare them?
I think it's really good, but I mean, A Fire Upon the Deep holds a very special place in my heart. I think A Deepness in the Sky might, on a literary level, be more like I think it might be crafted better, but I think like in terms of like ideas per page, like it's hard to beat, A Fire Upon the Deep in just terms of like
yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, that's a good assessment.
I will add something, David. I mean, but you were asking me about other thoughts about the book. I thought what was interesting was that there's an interesting melding of fantasy and science fiction tropes in both storylines, both interweaving storylines. And the Times world, we're dealing with these really interesting aliens, but it's set in this bizarre, and I think it's bizarre that it's kind of a medieval type setting with queens and castles and it's a typical fantasy setting with science fiction aliens in them. And then in the other storyline, you have this ragtag gang of space swashbuckling, space people on their ship, and among them is this fantasy type character. So I thought that was all interesting. And also, I will say we've been talking about how fantastic the book is, and I agree. I did have one reservation, and that was that I thought that probably my only reservation is that medieval setting in the Times world is so human. I mean, the alien characters are they're in libraries, they're drinking brandy, they're smoking, they're sitting around, and I'm thinking I couldn't help but think of those pictures of dogs that were playing poker. And that was my only reservation, that the world is just so human. I mean, I guess he did it maybe to ground us because the aliens are so cool and so alien, but that was probably my only nit.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly I had a really hard time getting it through my head that like when it's like Steele did this, like picturing like 5 dogs doing that rather than a person doing that. So like, yeah, I could definitely see just like, okay, let's not go crazy with the architecture and stuff. Let's keep everything else kind of understandable, because it's just sort of such a mental. You have to kind of like rewire your brain to like imagine 5 dogs doing everything these characters are doing.
I'd say that's definitely one of the harder parts for me as well. Yeah.
I'll say, like, I'm a visual person. I come from an art background, and I can imagine this stuff pretty easily. So I found it so much fun to imagine 5 dogs doing everything.
I love how Johanna, is just like she describes them as like a pack of puppies when she meets the
Yeah.
one 8-person group. I think one of the appeals of this book is that, like, if there's a science fiction trope that you're fond of, this probably has it, right? Like we mentioned space traders, kings and queens, medieval, right? That being plucked out of a medieval setting into a high science fiction setting. There's the sort of like the times as they develop. They go through kind of like the Enlightenment with the technology. There's the starships, the space opera, right? And then there's like the godlike aliens and godlike tech. Like, I mean, there's just so many different kinds of tropes that are all stacked on top of each other that are very carefully made as real as could be. That it's like if there's some kind of science fiction you love, there's a thread of it that you can follow through this whole book, and that also I think is like what speaks to one of its powers.
Yeah, well, when David was saying it reminds him of a fantasy novel, the medieval storyline on the Times world and everything, it was reminding me that as I was reading this, it was reminding me a lot of Game of Thrones, because it's this sort of, backstabbing and betrayal and court intrigue in a medieval society. And there's like mountains in this called the Ice Fangs, and there's mountains in Game of Thrones called the Frost Fangs and stuff like that. And it was just making me wonder if George R. R. Martin read this and the idea of telepathic dogs, originated in any way here.
Maybe. Oh.
I love all the betrayals and the politics and all of that. But my advice to the characters is don't trust the guy called Steele, and don't trust the one called Vendacious. There's just
something about the name I can't quite put a finger on.
I don't know what it is.
That was actually, I only have like 4 criticisms written down, and the name Vendacious being too on the nose is one of them. It was making me think of like in Lord of the Rings, like who would have ever thought that the scheming advisor would turn out to be, or the the guy named Grima Wormtongue would turn out to be the scheming, But I don't know, Toby. What do you make of that name Vendacious? Because I mean, they're all named sort of intimidating things, so it might just be part of their society that the Master of Spies is named something like that.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. Like they do take on those names that are kind of like almost aspirational, right? Because the Flenserists call themselves Flenserists because of, like there's the flensing, the act of flensing, right? Which is cutting off the useless. They're cutting out the useless members, right? That don't carry the pack's weight. They're, like you said, they're in that mode of oh geez, I'm kind of blowing the word. What is it? They believe in like breeding, for certain qualities.
Like eugenics?
Yes, yeah, they believe in eugenics. The bad Tines believe in eugenics, and even the good Tines kind of experiment with it, right? And it's like, oof, right? They are kind of like they've got some, as a result of the packs, they've got some loaded belief systems.
Yeah, I mean, so in universe, it kind of makes sense, but I just think in a story where the traitor, this character is going to turn out to be a traitor. Maybe name him something that doesn't sound like mendacious with one letter.
I think that's a fair criticism. That's a fair criticism.
Yeah. Can I? I'd like to just talk briefly about. I mean, again, I was focused on the craft of describing the aliens and how he pulls it off, and I thought that what was really interesting was the way that a trick that he uses that I think is awesome is he has the aliens describe the humans, and in the way they describe the humans, you get a sense of the aliens. And there was a little couple sentences here where he says, "This is one of the Tines looking at the humans." And they say there were 4 legs per member, but it walked on its rear legs only. What a clown! Yet it used its front paws for holding things. Not once did he see it use a mouth. He doubted if the flat jaws could get a good hold anyway. Those 4 paws were wonderfully agile. A single member could easily use tools. That's one quote, which I thought was just great. It gives you a sense of this. By describing the humans, you get a sense of the aliens. And then later on, Lord Steele is describing the aliens, and he says, the more Steele saw, the more he realized the intrinsic inferiority of the aliens. What a bizarre abortion they were. A race of intelligent singletons. Every one of them must be raised from nothing like a wholly newborn pack. Memories could only be produced by voice and writing. Each creature grew and aged and even died as a whole. Despite himself, Steele shivered. And I thought, wow, what a, kudos to Vernor Vinge. I think that's just great craft.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's super cool.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually there were some examples too where the humans think things that give you a sense of. I mean, we don't really see a lot of their society like Jeffrey and Joanna's or Ravna's, but occasionally they just say things that reveal what their societies are like. Like Joanna, when they're stranded on the alien planet, she says, or she thinks like she's sick and she's never been sick before, and she's like, no, but being sick is normal in a medieval society, so maybe I shouldn't be that concerned about this. And there's a part where she thinks, one of the characters thinks about how like, oh, you can walk around in the woods here where I come from. You had to have a permit to walk off the paths, in the park or something.
Yeah.
But the example I really wanted to mention of that is that the Scrode Riders are at one point they're at this place called Harmonious Repose, and they're kind of negotiating with aliens to fix their ship and stuff, and the Scrode Riders are haggling with the aliens, and Ravna has never seen haggling before because she's only ever been in societies where everyone always has perfect information about what everything is worth, and so there's never any disagreement about there's just never any negotiating. It's like we both know this is worth exactly this, and so this is what the price is going to be. And I thought that was a really interesting
Yeah. By the way, David, when they stopped at Harmonious Repose, almost as a throwaway line, there's a long description of these gigantic the system with gigantic rings around it, and I thought, look, he just kind of used Ringworld as an afterthought. The story is so cosmic that Ringworld is just a paragraph in the novel.
Right.
Well, that was really cool because it said that ring. How did it go? It was like ring systems like this are created by, like planets being blown up and something else. And it's like, it's like the whole, like the way I think it's described, the way I imagined it was like the whole solar system is like one giant, like ring of debris basically. And then there's these like giant alien structures built up out of it and stuff. It was like and that's just like, yeah, you would think that, like that could be the setting for a whole novel. And then that's just like,
or road stop,
a page of description, Yeah.
Yeah. And then like the tusked aliens with all the scrimshaw instead of tattoos.
Yeah, those are very cool. And how about the butterfly species? They're so beautiful and dainty, but they're vicious and mercenaries. You need to stay away from them.
There was even just a cool detail. There's a description of they enter this room where it's this spherical room, and then there's trees growing toward the center from all directions. And that's just a throwaway detail too.
Yeah. And then like even with the butterfly aliens, the apprehenti, they are like a civilization on the way down, right? So like their whole thing is to like use the chaos of the moment to kind of reestablish their like empire almost. So it's just sort of like, and it's just a small little passing thing, but like you get this sense of like, a whole civilizational history and kind of tied up there in just that one little piece.
Yeah. I'll just mention one other, like, okay, and seriously, like spoilers again, but so at the end of the book, how they defeat the Blight is that they deploy this countermeasure, and what it does, like talking about giant scale space opera shit, it sends out like this like wave of slowness of the slow zone out into the beyond, out into the very low parts of the transcend, just making super intelligence and faster than light travel and all this stuff impossible for like 100 million civilizations or something. All at once, resulting in presumably hundreds of millions of deaths along the way in order to wipe out the Blight. And Ravna has this thought of this sort of passing, it's just again, it's just this throwaway line, but like, oh, maybe the countermeasure was actually worse than the blight. And I thought that was really cool. I mean, like, a really cool thought. It's like, oh, they did this whole quest to stop this thing that seemed so like the worst thing you could possibly imagine. This evil, super intelligent virus that's wiping out millions of civilizations or whatever. But maybe the cure was actually worse than the disease. That's just another, like, I just had my mind blown so many times reading this book. This book, again, that was published in 1992. I mean, and that was one of them. It's like, wow.
Yeah,
maybe
totally agree that when they say we won, we defeated the blight, and we killed 100 million civilizations as well along the way. That thought definitely jumped out at me as well.
That last Usenet post in the book, like, still puts chills down my spine to this day, where it's like a plaintive, so like the slow zone that this countermeasure creates, and kind of blasts outwards and upwards up through everything. So there's a message sent from someone who's been following the war events, but it has to route it all the way around the other side of the galaxy to reach someone on the other side of this new slow kind of like, triangle that's been carved out of the galaxy. And it's just this plaintive, like, hello, is anyone out there? I'm sending this through every single relay all the way around the other side of the galaxy to see if there's anyone on the other side of this. Like, can you reply back?
So what would happen if our internet just went down throughout the whole world? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like that. Like, well, it's something like, not just that, but then like I've been following the war in Ukraine, and the open source intelligence community, the way they're trying to parse together what's happening and what cities have fallen and what movements are happening in Russia. I had this really weird moment of feeling like one of those commenters who are talking back and forth about what's happening during the blight with inside the novel, and reading some OS intelligent open source intelligence reports. Some of those texts on Twitter or wherever that I'm reading feel so much like those moments in Fire Upon the Deep, where they're just exchanging information about what civilizations and worlds have fallen and what has happened. Like, it's that kind of same kind of like everyone looking at this world-changing event or a galaxy-changing event in real time and trying to just figure out what the hell is going on.
I just want to mention, so in I sent you guys the Slashdot article written by Robotech Master, and he says of A Fire Upon the Deep, he says, I have heard rumors that some of these posts, the posts in the book, the Usenet style posts in A Fire Upon the Deep, were written based on the posting styles of well-known Usenet kooks of the day, but the annotations fail to provide any proof of this. Oh. So if anybody knows anything about that, I would be very, very interested to know if that's true.
I was like, I'm just slightly too young for Usenet.
I mean, it's like Twitter with less, longer messages. Basically.
It's longer posting Twitter.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll also just mention that I thought it was worth noting in John Clute's introduction, he says that Brainwave by Poul Anderson has this idea of people getting of the Milky I think it's of the solar system finally moving out of this region of the Milky Way that has for all of history suppressed human intelligence, and so everybody just starts getting really, really smart because now our mental processes are speeding up. And that this is from 54. This is an important predecessor of the zones of thought. And there's a lot of Poul Anderson references. I mean, I mentioned in the dedication, Vinge mentions Poul Anderson, and then throughout the book he uses the word sophont, which means sort of generally human level, a being with generally human level intelligence. But that's kind of a made up word, but it was made up by Poul Anderson's wife and used in his. Poul Anderson was the first person to use that. So there's like, Poul Anderson references, throughout this book. And then in the dedication also, Vinge mentions the story Junior by Robert Abernathy as exploring an alien somewhat similar to the writers. So I just want to mention, if you like this book and want some further reading, those are some things. Actually, also Joan D. Vinci, who was married to Vernor Vinge for a long time, has written some stuff in the Zones of Thought. The Outcasts of Heaven Belt and Legacy, and says she was also working on a novel about Pham Nguyen. I don't think that ever was published to date, but if you're
speaking of Pham, David, I think that perhaps for me the most moving scene in the whole book was his spoilers, his death scene at the very end, where he, as he's dying, he finally comes to realize that all of his memories are real, and he's tormented by the fact that he's thought that maybe it's all fiction, and he looks at Ravna and he says, she loved me even though whether it was real or not, she still was able to love me, and it was his last words are, I'm real, and I just found that so moving. That was just terrific. That scene and the one with the Scrode Writer's death, I thought were the two most moving scenes in this gigantic book.
I like the epilogue where they left Greenstalk, the other Scrode Writer, and turns out she's kind of pregnant with, I guess caviar babies or whatever. Whatever you call those. And they just, it's like, well, she's gonna have other Scrode Writers without Scrodes on this Tynes planet, and that's
I agree with you, Abby. I love that scene too. That was just terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to kill your buzz, David, but I did wonder. So basically, as Pham is dying, he gets this message from the superhuman intelligence that sort of controlled him, saying basically like, you were always so awesome that the only way I could manipulate you was to make you doubt who you really were. And then he dies happy. And it did make me wonder if the intelligence was just telling him what would make him happy.
In
his last moments.
Too cynical.
Well, and so we glossed over the fact that Pham Nguyen, like the god tries to cram itself into him because it needs to pilot Pham down into the slowness to release the countermeasure and release it in the right direction, because the countermeasure is just not intelligent enough to figure out where to point itself. And that's basically, this whole book is basically about, trying to get Pham to the countermeasure so that the old one, which is what they call this vast god that, was in the Transcend, which was attacked by the Blight, but put itself down into Pham at the last second so it could go launch the countermeasure, is just, like it's there within him, talking about this stuff. But I do think if you read the preview, the next book, A Deepness in the Sky, we learn a lot about Pham.
Okay, yeah, I definitely want to read that, because this is easily one of the best science fiction novels I've ever read.
I would agree with that. I mean, it really, to me, it ranks way up there with like the top.
Yeah, ditto. It's definitely in my top 10.
Well, as we all know, it's like in my top 3.
I would put it in my top 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the second most number of times, Toby, you've ever read a book?
Probably The Hobbit. I used to read it twice a year, every year, after the first time I read it until my senior year of college.
So how many times? So that's like
that. I first read it probably in 6th grade. So that would be 6th grade. So 6 years plus 10 years, twice a year, 20 times. Yeah, I've read that at least 20 times.
I mean, I've read some of the Roger Zelazny's Amber books. Definitely, I've read 40 or 50 times. But those are really short, and The Hobbit's really short. I mean, this is not a short book. This is like a 450-page book. This is a long book to have read 44 times. That's a big. That's dedication.
But the thing is, like, it's not dedication. Like every time I crack open this book, I fall into it. Like the copy I had on my shelf for the longest time was just completely ratty and just completely creased and like, just miserable with like dirt from my hands, because I would just like open it up at some section of it just to kind of like check something or just re-experience a portion of it, and I would just fall right back into it and just find myself at the end again without meaning to. I just fall into the book, the world. Every time it just sucks me right in. And so it's not like work. It's just sort of like going back into your favorite world and living there again, even though you know what's going to happen, even though you know it's coming again. I just get sucked right back in, and I don't have to work at it. There are books like this for me where I just crack it open, and as they start to expand, as they start to tell the story again, I just go like, I just love being in this place.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're pretty much out of time. So Abby, any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just say like this one note I had is like you have like nested first contact, nested ulterior motives and betrayals. Like there's all these like just plot wise it's stunning, as well as creatively wise. So
well, if you see all of or if Vinge comments that he couldn't have written this book without this method he describes of having like all these hundreds of annotations, and it would allow him to keep track of everything, and he would have little notes about each plot line and stuff. Or
the work shows, the amount of time and effort he put into thinking it through. I really admire that.
Yeah,
it's impressive, and just following up on the deception. It's interesting. One of the themes that I thought ran through the book was the idea that we're all at the whims of greater forces, and Fam is inhabited by that god, not that god, by the higher being. They call it God Shatter, and then the Scrode Riders are also programmed by the Blight to be traitors, and then the bulk of the plot is a young human child being deceived and manipulated by one of the villains, Lord Steele. And the whole book, I'm just like, oh, he's treated. It's so frustrating. He's tricking him. And so again, it pulls you through the manipulations and the deception. Pulls you through. I love, by the way, that when the adult humans show up, it's like, oh yeah, he's the villain. He's like, it's obvious. It was very satisfying. So and the blight, the virus, of course, it kind of zombifies whole civilizations and takes them over. So I thought that was interesting. This manipulation and control of other beings. So I like that aspect of it.
As a young writer, this made me want to write space opera and want to strive to do something like this. And as a 43-year-old writer, it completely intimidates me that like this exists. And how can you ever measure up like your own writing? How can you achieve something like this? It's like it actually kind of sometimes like really like just knocks me back a peg that this book even exists.
I feel the same way. Absolutely. I do.
Well, I think it's telling he didn't write tons and tons of novels. I think he spent a lot of time on this.
This was years and years. Yeah. Because I remember waiting for the next one, right? Like, I mean, that was like this 12, like, I remember like reading that it was going to happen. And like, all these people like, I shouldn't do this, but like all, people complain about how long the latest Game of Thrones book has taken. But like, I waited like 15 years for this book, The Deepness in the Sky, and I was just like, absolutely, this is going to take him forever to write. Cause like you said, you can see the work done in A Fire Upon the Deep. Like, yeah, it makes sense to me that like one of these books comes out every 15 years because good Lord.
Yeah.
I mean, I interviewed him in 2012 about Children of the Sky. And I was just looking. Has he been working on something for the last 10 years, or because it doesn't look like I
don't know. I hope he's enjoying retirement.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have no idea, but he might feel the same way you do. It's like, okay, how do I ever, measure up to, how do I beat what I've already done? It's so good,
I mean, he can rest on his laurels as far as I'm concerned. Like, I mean, just any one of those 3 books is an achievement.
Absolutely. Yeah. So once again, definitely, no question, one of the best science fiction books I've ever read. Everyone go check it out. Can't wait to read Deepness in the Sky. And so, so let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Tobias S. Buckell, Abby Goldsmith, and Mercurio D. Rivera. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Tobias S. Buckell, Abby Goldsmith, and Mercurio D. Rivera for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. Alright, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.